A serial killer, a murderer, and somehow, unknown, this was the cold, creepy case of the infamous Zodiac Killer. A case still left as a mystery today. But should it be unsolved with all the amounts of evidence and clues that got compiled? The Zodiac's letters claim that he has killed 37 people, but the police can confirm an amount of 5 were killed and 2 injured. He left letters and sent items to the police. Surviving victims saw him, and yet he was still never identified. The whole country became intrigued by this case. But then, suddenly, it all stopped. The case is still open and fascinates people and inspires new law enforcement today. In Northern California, in the 1960s, killings occurred, and they were claimed by the Zodiac Killer. Letters were sent in to the police, and threats were made to publish codes in the newspaper. The first murder took place in Benicia, California, on Lake Herman Road in a parked car. The victims were David Faraday and Betty W. Jensen. This was especially odd because of location and no evidence of anyone even close to them, but it was obvious that it was not a suicide. The second killing was 6 months later with Darlene Farrell and Michael McGuo in Blue Rock Springs Park. The weirdest part was there was no seen motive for doing it. Michael survived the attack. He was able to give a description of the man. Within 1 hour of this case, someone called in claiming to be responsible for it and the previous murder of David and Betty. This is when the letters started showing up. One of his codes translated to, "The best part of killing is when I will die, I will be reborn into paradise, and those I have killed will be my slaves. So I will not give you my name, because you will try to slow down or stop my process." This code was translated by a history teacher and his wife one weekend. These letters related to the short story, The Most Dangerous Game, where the people were being hunted by General Zaroff, and he enjoyed hunting and killing people. The third killing of the Zodiac was Celine and Brian on the shore of Lake Berryessa. They were having a picnic when Celine noticed a strange man near them. They were tied up and stabbed. Brian survived the attack. He was able to give a description of the man, and it matched the first one that was given. But it was harder for him to see because of the mask the killer was wearing. An hour later, there was a call claiming to be the Zodiac Killer, saying he did it. They traced it back to a payphone, but found no evidence or DNA. When they reached the scene, there was a car parked there inscribed with the details of the killing, most likely put there by the Zodiac himself. The last confirmed case was different than the others. The murder of a cab driver, Paul Stein. He was shot by his passenger. A girl happened to look out her window and called into the police. She was able to get a good look at him, and she gave the same description as the others, about 5'7" to 5'9" in height, 200-ish pounds, and reddish-brown hair. As the police came, they saw a man about this description and asked if he had seen anyone suspicious running. This man said yes and pointed them into a different direction. People today really think this was the killer the police were talking to. During this time, races were not equal yet, so some people believed he was black despite the white description. 3 days later, a letter signed from the Zodiac claimed the police could have gotten him but messed up. In the taxi driver's case, they found a bloody fingerprint, but in one of the Zodiac's letters, he said he was leaving fake clues. I think he just said this to cover himself up. After this, he wrote about shooting up a school bus because he was getting tired of all these adults. This made people outraged. They even started a group specialized in finding him called the Zodiac Task Force, but there was no more confirmed killings after this. In 1970, he sent a code saying, "My name is blank." To this day, it is not solved. Letters were gradually still sent until they stopped in 1971. But a last one was sent in 1974. In this, he claims to have killed a total of 37 people. But there has been no sign of him since then, and all the letters ceased. So, through all of this, of course, there were suspects, and everyone had their own suspicion. So, there were probably top 3 that are most talked about. So, the first one, which makes no sense just because it's too far out there, but people think that it could have been Ted Cruz, and it was just mostly because he looked like the picture, which he does, but at this time throughout the killings he would have only been 2 or 3, so that is totally ruled out. The second, there was a man named Gary Stewart who believed his biological father was the Zodiac Killer, and he did look a lot like the picture, but there was never there was literally nothing solid that could prove this. But he went on to write a book that is now published about how much he thinks it was his father. And then there's the third option, and I believe that the Zodiac Killer was Arthur Lee Allen. On the same night as the attack on Celine and Brian, Arthur told his family he was going to Lake Berryessa, which was the same location. When they came home, he was covered in blood and had a bloody knife in his car. It looked oddly suspicious, especially since Celine and Brian were stabbed. 2 years later, some of Arthur's old friends told the police their thoughts, and apparently, when Arthur was younger, he used to call himself the Zodiac, and it was a nickname before any of this stuff even started occurring. He also started showing creepy signs by telling his friends he wanted to hunt people and go shoot them with a gun. To me, it already sounds like a murder. With this, the police questioned him. Arthur brought up the book The Most Dangerous Game by Richard Cornell. And the Zodiac had referenced this once in one of his letters to the police. He was also wearing a watch with the sign the Zodiac used to sign on his letters. The biggest piece of evidence, I think, was Arthur was convicted for child molesting and was in prison for 3 years. This was the 3-year period where there was no activity from the Zodiac Killer. The survivor, Michael, also picked Arthur in a lineup of suspects. But even with all of this, there was nothing solid like a confession or DNA matching, so the case stayed cold. But it was safe to say the Zodiac Killer is now in his 80s or 90s, or even more likely dead. This mystery really spooked everyone at the time, and people would not go out alone. Today, the case can still be argued as the most infamous murder mystery in America. Gianrico Pervisi, who investigated the case and worked for San Francisco police, stated, "There have been terrible crimes in the city, but nothing quite like the Zodiac case." At the time this was happening, the police were extremely frustrated. They had thousands of suspects, but no one was ever arrested. A case it is compared to was Great Britain's Reaper, who killed 5 people. Like the Zodiac, he also stayed in contact with the police and was never found. The people around the United States all had major interest, and even movies were produced about this case. But the people in Northern California were absolutely terrified, never knowing when he would strike next. The police department still holds today 30 boxes of evidence. This case encouraged advances in DNA investigating and testing, because the lack of knowledge then caused it to be troubling. But now, with better technology, there are only bits and fragments of DNA pieces found, no whole strands, which makes it hard to solve. This case also impacted society with law enforcement and ways to catch criminals, leading to better fingerprint analysis and criminal background checks. This case as a whole started to prepare the world for the future where things are not always so safe, and how the violence would only start to get worse. It is hard to say consequences since no one was ever arrested or charged for the murder, but many were angered with the police and blamed them for everything that happened and not being able to have it prevented. The mysterious, eerie case of the Zodiac still fascinates and terrifies people today. It is hard to say if anyone will ever be listed as the true culprit for the many devastating slaughters. Was the Zodiac just very sneaky and good at what he did? Or was the police and investigation system just flawed? This case is one with very original circumstances and events. It set a tone for society and inspired entertainment, movies, and documentaries. It adds the need for people to call for justice and closure. This is the unsolved case of the Zodiac Killer. I give credits to San Francisco Chronicle paper for their helpful information. Also, a YouTube video made by Kendall Ray with her great images and facts, set in an easy to understand format. Thank you for viewing